Logan YouTube. Um, I must apologize. It's been a while. Um, you know, certain things in life tend to take up your time. So I figured I was overdue to make another video, and I don't really have an agenda for this. I'll talk some, I'll play some, we'll see what happens. Um, I've been thinking a lot, or before I say that, I've been watching this other guy lately on YouTube. Sorry, there's a lot of birds outside, but I've been watching videos of this Jimmy Bruno guy, this guitar player that just kind of sits in front of a camera and talks, sometimes about tunes, sometimes about the state of jazz and all of that. And I guess I tend to like that format. So if anybody wants to connect me with Jimmy Bruno in terms of how I'm going to do videos, that's fine with me. But anyway, I've just been thinking a lot lately about, in my playing, how to always get back to basics and get back to the traditions of things, and specifically I've had Barry Harris on my mind a lot, how he's keeping it real and teaching us how to really, really do this thing, and every time I feel like I'm straying away, I always try to get back to, the things that he says about how to think about playing, how to learn, how to improvise and all that. And seems that my playing always instantly goes from maybe a little muddled to being more clear every time when I try to think of the things that he says. It was really a knockout. I was listening to him do his version of Embraceable You and all of that, and if you've ever heard that, look up Barry Harris playing in Barry Harrisable You. That's a good one. He has his own lyrics and stuff, but man, he just really shows us how to do this. I'll tell you what, I totally stole that one thing where he goes in the last two bars where it's but he does it like this. And then he wants people to go here. Like that thing. And I must apologize. I've been made aware by some people when I play that I tend to make this weird hissing noise with my mouth. I don't know why I do that. It's just kind of my unintentional version of audiating, I guess. So if you hear anything like that over this video, I'm sorry. I'll try to be more aware that I'm doing it, because I know, especially in video format, it gets annoying. So I apologize for that. Anyway, let's see, what can we talk about? Let's talk about jam sessions for a second. I don't think I've really done a video on jam sessions. So, what really annoys me about jam sessions is it seems a lot of times people just want to call these weird tunes. It seems like they're so bored of playing, things like the blues and I Got Rhythm and All the Things You Are and such and such. They just want to say, oh, let's play Humpty Dumpty by Chick Corea. No good. But let's play Moment's Notice, No thanks. How about we play something like It's You Were No One or something like that. You know, it seems people just want to call all the weird stuff nowadays, especially in Chicago. They really want to do that. You know, maybe not at the bigger places like the jam sessions at the Mill or Andy's sometimes is kind of hit and miss. But, you know, if the median age of the house band is high enough, they won't let people get away with calling crap like that, you know, which I think is what it should be. You know, it's just, it's kind of annoying to deal with that. So if you don't like that, fine, go somewhere else, you know. The other thing I can really respect about Barry Harris, you know, he's seen so much of history, and you combine that with his age, and he just doesn't care, you know, which I think is great. Uh, I think I care less and less. You know, I'm trying to not care as much, to not try to fit a certain agenda that people want. You know, oh, you got to play big chords. Don't really care about that. Small chords are the thing. You know, if you're playing a song like you know, Perdido, if you're playing Perdido, you know, instead of doing things like all these big chord stuff, I don't want to do that. I want to do what you really don't hear people doing, which is playing small chords. So you could say stuff like this: 1, 2. You know what I'm saying? You know, go to any jam session, piano, guitar, they're not going to do that. Or something like this. You'll never hear that. You know, you'll just always hear the whole time, you know. So I'd rather be one of the few rather than one of the many, you know, and who cares? Who cares? You know. I see that, you know, I don't know if I've been clear about this in previous videos, but I live in the Chicago area, you know. That all these jam sessions, all of these piano players and all these guitar players, I'm telling you, every single one, they just play the big chords. I'm telling you, everywhere. But they just don't play small chords. They don't. You just don't hear that. You know, whether in jam session settings, performance settings, all of that, they just think there's one way to do it. And I just, you know, the longer I live here, the more I see, the less I just care about trying to fit that specific agenda. The big chord, knowing all the modes will help you. Higher education bullcrap. I just don't care about it, you know, because I'd rather listen to somebody who's seen so much of the history of jazz, like Barry. You know, I'd rather listen to someone who is a living institution as opposed to a brick and mortar institution. You know, as far as I'm concerned, and all of that. Anyway, so back to the Jimmy Bruno thing. You know, Jimmy, I don't know if you've seen any of my stuff or any of that, but I always appreciate when there's someone that plays jazz, real jazz, that isn't afraid to just tell the truth and tell it like it is. I can always respect that because the music needs that, especially in this day and age, and also people as a society need that, you know, with, you know, especially younger kids that feel entitled to things, or they feel entitled to disrespect people, especially older people. You know, anyway, I'm I digress, but we just need more of people who just kind of tell it like it is. you know. Uh, oh, I guess another thing that I could talk about is I've talked about this in a few ways in the previous videos, but solo piano, you know. Now, granted, I used to be one of these people that one of the main vehicles that I used to learn to play solo piano was by walking bass lines with my left hand and all of that. And I kind of got into the jazz organ thing, but you know, the more that I try to think about tradition to me, or what I feel is tradition, I think I try to get away from that, you know, because I just, even around here, Chicago area too, man, and other places, solo piano, it's just all this. You know, and I guess there's a time and place for that, and you know, the people who accompany vocalists too, you know, vocalists want to hear that, but I guess for me, I think about, you know, piano players like Barry and also Hank Jones and Tommy Flanagan and you know, certainly others that they never got into that walking bass type of thing. You know, they're perfectly content with playing a song with just their left hand just playing root position chords, you know, as opposed to like rootless stuff. You know, let's say you take a song like if you were to play a song on the piano by yourself without walking bass and without doing stride either, you should be perfectly content with playing a song like Take Indiana or something. You know, you should be perfectly content with just playing a song without having to walk bass. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. But nowadays, instead of that, we have people who do that, but they play rootless voicings up here. So it's something like this. And I just can't stand that crap. You know, people who play solo piano, solo jazz piano where the left hand just plays rootless voicing stuff. I just cannot tell you enough how I can't stand that. You know, even some of Barry's videos, he talks about, I think it's one where he talks about Green Dolphin Street, and he says, I can't stand. You know, and believe me, I've gone through phases of my playing where I've done that, but the more that I try to think about doesn't mean anybody else has to, but what I believe is a tradition, I just don't want to play that way. You know, I think about people like Dizzy Gillespie who say things like, it's taken a whole lifetime to learn about what I can leave out or what I don't want to play. You know, and I just, you know, it just resonates with me more and more and more and more, you know. I don't know who's asking about sheet music. I don't know exactly what you're talking about. Do you mean for any of the tunes I just played? The first one that I did earlier on was It's You or No One. And then that second one I did was a little bit of Back Home in Indiana. So those were those two tunes. Both of those songs are important for real jazz musicians to learn, especially Indiana, especially that one. So anyway, that's a little about solo piano too. Gee, what else can I talk about? Oh yeah, the lick players. You know, you gotta have a special place in your heart for all the lick players. The one who just learned the things like or like you know, like those people. Man, I cannot stand that at all. That's not jazz to me. You know, I I used to be one of those people where, if someone wanted to talk to me about jazz and they always ask me what I think about people like Coltrane and uh, later Miles Davis and hello Lucas, how you doing? Thanks for tuning in. But they ask me about Wayne Shorter, McCoy Tyner, all those people, or Chick Corea, and I just tell them, I don't really think much of it, or that style of playing or all of that. Oh, we have some questions. Again, thank you for tuning in. Someone asked, do you have any advice for big band playing? Okay, so let me talk about that for a second. So, especially at the collegiate level, anybody who has followed my channel, you know that I like to talk about the so-called higher education style of what they kind of expect you to do. So, someone's question was playing in big band settings. So the common expectation is kind of what I talked about at the beginning of this video, that you'll just play big chords. Let's say you were playing something like I don't know, like I Got Rhythm or whatever. So the band could count off 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. I got rhythm, I got music. That's maybe more of the expectation that they would have for you. But to me, there is nothing wrong. If I were playing in a big band, I would still play small chords. I would still play chords with like 3 notes in them. I don't have to play C7 like this. I can just play C7 like this if I want to. I don't have to play F13 sharp 11, like this all the time, just because some stupid harmony book says to, or my so-called jazz professor says to, who says I can't just play down here. Like if playing Sweet Georgia Brown, let's say you start like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, da, 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 da. But some, especially bass players, if you followed my channel, I talk about bass players and say, no, you got to play bigger chords, you got to play up here, you got to, don't you want to be that person occasionally that just doesn't do what they say, but you still do something that works? You know what I mean? I'm not just saying do it deliberately because you have a different agenda, but that you realize that there's also other parts of jazz that just seem to be overshadowed by what a white person's institution of what they think jazz should be or how people should learn it say that you should do it a certain way. You know what I mean? So, you know what? If you're going to be the person that plays big chords, go for it, especially in a big band setting. It's true that they probably cut more over a rhythm section or over the horns and all that, but there's nothing wrong with playing low down here, Nothing wrong with that. Duke Ellington, even in big bands, still played low on the piano. Count Basie, even more so. If those two people, two of the most successful jazz band leaders, big band leaders of all time, played low on the piano, then you can too. I'd rather be one of the few than one of the many. So that's my answer to that question. So if there's, out of the 7 of you who've tuned in, again, thank you. I tried to think what time I could do these during the day for when people would tune into them. But if anybody has any questions about what I think or anything like that, go ahead. But you might not like the answers. Just saying. I also think people underrate Teddy Wilson, Jess Stacy approach to comping when they play in contemporary. Oh yeah, especially. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, yeah, Rudy, no problem. First of all, for the person who asked that question, I'm surprised that you actually know who Jess Stacy was. So thank you. That shows me that you know a little above average more about jazz on the piano than most people. But I think a lot of the reason that people just want to do all these big chords is because a lot of them are just written out on that sheet, you know, and you have to play them exactly like that, and that's garbage. It's complete garbage. It's like it's saying, well, jazz is improvisational, but we're going to go ahead and pre-write out the chords because it's going to go exactly like this. What? What is that? That's like saying you already know what the soloist is going to do. Now, on the subject of those two people that you mentioned, Teddy Wilson and Jess Stacy, they've got this type of thing going on where it's not like the full stride, but it's like kind of the broken stride. Like, let's say if it was like T for 2 or something like that. There is nothing wrong with that, you know, as opposed to you know, which one sounds more authentic and more old school and more jazz to you? You know what I'm saying? But yeah, it's very true that so-called contemporary and so-called jazz, if you can even call it that, especially in big band contexts, it's hardly jazz anymore to me. You know, you listen to like Maria Schneider and all that, that's not jazz to me. Or even removed from the professional realm, you know, middle school jazz bands, even high school jazz bands, you know, they're playing things like movie theme from The Incredibles or a disco version of Car Wash. Now, I get it. You know, I was that kid that was into that, but it's just brainwashing from the start, you know. Same thing with vocal jazz groups, too. You got a bunch of kids that they came from, say, a pretty decently sized high school, I think, for the stuff, and then they go to college and they do a vocal jazz ensemble thing. And if you put them in charge of picking the music, they're not going to pick standards. They're going to pick these watered down, hokey arrangements by like Kirby Shaw and people like that that don't know the first thing about jazz and hardly about arranging. And they're just going to do those things. They're going to do versions of Hallelujah or For Once in My Life or all of that. Maybe occasionally they'll throw in like a Hoagie Carmichael song, you know. So it's, anyway, I digressed really far from that original question, but yes, I would agree that strictly in terms of those two people like Teddy Wilson and Jess Stacy and Joe Bushkin and people like that, that, you know, all these big band directors say you just can't play that way. I think that's bogus. It's like they can't stand the fact that when it's a major chord, it always has to be like a 6/9 chord. They always have to add like the extensions. What about just a 6 chord? Like, here's C major. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't have to be. But for some reason, I guess it has to now. That's ridiculous. That's C major, you know, C6. Nothing wrong with that. So we've just gotten away from so much stuff, guys. It's ridiculous. New York City, you know, Detroit, Chicago, where I'm at, we've gotten away from so much, you know. And the more I talk about it, the less I care. The whole contemporary jazz scene, I don't believe in it. You know, sure, you can call it contemporary, and I guess you can call it music, but to me, you can't call it jazz. No kind of way. It's the same way in Detroit, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, Kansas City, you name it. It's all there. Germany, Berlin, I know they've got the whole avant-garde thing going. Even when I watch, even when I watch videos of jam sessions in various places overseas, like there's a whole slew of videos of jam session footage of Paris's club, the Duc des Lombards or whatever. I know I'm mispronouncing that, but all the solos just play out all the time. You know, it's all messed up, you know. But who do I care if I'm crotchety? Don't care. There's no school like the old school, in my opinion. Nothing like it. So what else? Give me your questions. Your most burning burning things that you want to hear. Make me angry. Make me try to say something that's gonna spur you to do something. Go for it. That's a whole tone scale, you know. People hardly know how to play that nowadays. You know, you can even do it like this. I stole this from Barry. Look. Dig that. That's in thirds going contrary motion like that. Oh, I lost it. Crazy. You know. But it's just really, all this is really messed up, guys. I don't, you know, I hardly know what to do about it. We need more people like Barry and more people who, you know, the older. See, it's interesting when I talk about people that play jazz, a lot of people they don't say jazz, they just say older musicians or younger musicians or whatever it is. But I like to think of it as, you know, if you're serious about playing jazz, call yourself a jazz musician, you know. But people they just only say musician. Even at jam sessions, even around here, they say, "Are you a musician?" They never say, "Are you a jazz musician?" You know, I guess if it's a jazz jam session, it would make sense to ask somebody if they are a jazz musician as opposed to just a musician. You know, but you know, I'm just one guy. I just have my opinions and all that. You know, Art Blakey said once. He said, "Opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one." You know. I like that one. Oh, we got a question. How come nobody ever mentions? I thought I saw Jackie Byard. There are a limited group of pianist people always nod to. Yeah, definitely. Now, the thing about Jackie Byard that I can respect is that he can stride really convincingly. You know, I don't know if there's a whole lot of recordings of him playing solo. I know there are some, but he's got the whole stride thing going. He can do that. Now, he also kind of entered the avant-garde and all of that, which I don't really mess with that, you know, but yeah, Jackie Byard is definitely one of those people that is well versed in his approach to the instrument, but in his later years it gets a little too wild for me. But yeah, he's one of those less mentioned people, but the standard fare of people is they always ask, you know, even other jazz musicians or pseudo jazz musicians that I've worked with, you know, they say, "Oh, who do you like?" And then the first three they ask is always, "Oh, do you like Bill Evans? Do you like McCoy Tyner? Do you like Keith Jarrett?" And it's like, it just pervades so much of, it's like people don't know any other people than that, you know? Same thing with saxophone players. It's like Coltrane's the only one that matters. That's just bull crap. You know, Coltrane's the best. Wrong. Wrong. You know, they'd rather talk about him than Coleman Hawkins. I think that's wrong. Or Lester Young. Or Wardell Gray. Or Zoot Sims. Or Barney Willen. Or Flip Phillips. I don't agree with that. They just, Coltrane's apparently the most important, and I guess Michael Brecker is too. Or all of these people, you know, especially in New York. If you think about the tenor players that so-called dominate the New York scene, you know, all the Charles Owens, the Joel Franz, the Seamus Blake, all those people. It's like there's no room for anybody else. Now, I'm not about to say that those people haven't studied the tradition at all. Ben Webster, yeah, great. That's how you play a ballad on the tenor saxophone or any saxophone in jazz. Ben Webster and Coleman Hawkins, that's how you play a ballad. You know, even as much as I don't necessarily respect Miles Davis, he said I can't remember if he said after he listened to Ben Webster or after Coleman Hawkins, that's how he learned to play ballads. I can't exactly remember, but yeah, I would rather go see Ben Webster any day than Coltrane. Any day. You know, I'd rather go see someone like Dexter Gordon or even Gene Ammons or somebody other than, you know, Michael Brecker or something like that. Or Donnie McCaslin was the other name that I was gonna mention. You know, the whole stadium jazz thing. Forget it. That's not jazz to me. I think that's a bunch of garbage, to tell you the truth. You know. But see, again, the older I get and the more that I think about things, the more that I just don't care. I don't really care what other people think. You know, I think I would rather be one of the few than one of the many. You know, there's only a select, especially on the saxophone, that I would prefer to go hear. You know, last winter I was this close to going to see. I'll get to your comment in just a second. I was this close last February in Chicago. It was going to be Harry Allen and Scott Hamilton, two great tenor players, just straight ahead swing at the Jazz Showcase, and I really regret not going. The winter weather was pretty bad, but I'd rather go see them than most so-called jazz tenor players these days, anytime, because they actually play real tunes. You know, they play, you know, or they play Just You, Just Me, you know, or they play I Can't Get Started. You know, they actually play real tunes and they're not stuck doing the, you know, forget it. You know, I really should have taken the time to go see him. I really wish I didn't. All right. Anyway, so let's go back to some of these comments. I think this is the most comments I've ever had in one video, which is awesome. Let's see, what do we got? All right, so Lucas asked, as I started, I thought the best sax player is the one who can improvise super fast over giant steps. Yeah, well, wrong. But as I aged, I realized that, what did it say? The hardest thing to do is to play as simple and as perfect as possible. Yeah, exactly, Lucas. And we have to know about the stuff that Barry talks about to know. Like, we have to know about voice leading. We have to know about scales. We have to know about melody and all of that, you know. So glad you wised up. I certainly did, you know. And it actually, watch Barry's video on how to play giant steps, because that is that is so great, you know, is to get rid of the people who play like, you know, and he does something where it's more melodic. See, yeah, I don't even know the changes well enough, because I'd rather know changes to other songs that actually matter to be able to play better than that one, you know. Let's see, what else do we get? Can you explain the Barry Harris concept of phrasing 6 over the 4? Okay. Yeah, so I think I could be wrong about this, but Barry talks a lot about, even when you're in 4/4, when you're doing a ballad, he talks about thinking in 6 over the 4. So 4/4 is here, like 1, 2, 3, 4. He talks about superimposing 6 beats over that 4, like this. Let's see. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You know, like that whole thing. So the most obvious place to do that is in a ballad. So what he means by that is if you're thinking in 6, even when you're playing something in 4/4, the best way I think that it makes sense to do that is to think of the 6 beats or the 6 beats within the 4 and then think of them in terms of eighth notes. So instead of, like, if this is the 4/4 tempo, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm used to doing it with this hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That you think of that in terms of eighth notes. Da 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 da. Right? So if I were playing a ballad like let's just go with Body and Soul, I could think of it like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, it might be difficult to tell, but when I was doing that, I was thinking more in 6. Now I'm going to do, it seems almost rhythmically freer and almost not in time, but it is. If I were to just play that song in 4/4, but only think of it in terms of 4/4, it would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. You see how it's almost more metrically square? It's because if you only think of playing in 4 as eighth notes in 4/4, then it's going to sound rigid. But if you think of it in terms of the 6, it really opens up your phrasing and it seems freer. For someone listening that's not used to it, it seems like it's not in time and it's kind of not precise. But if you just always try to be aware of the 6 against the 4, it'll start to make more sense. It feels uncomfortable at first, and it took me a while to kind of get used to that, but you just kind of have to trust your internal rhythm. And the other piece of advice I would have is to listen to Billie Holiday. Listen to Charlie Parker play ballads and listen to Billie Holiday sing ballads, and you'll really see what I'm talking about. Because sometimes in the midst of that, especially at begrudgingly slow tempos, it seems like they're just not rhythmically precise, but it's not bad. They're just thinking in 6. So I hope that helps. All right, someone else made a comment. Hello, sorry, I'm going to butcher your name, man. Sonil, thanks. Thank you for watching and tuning in and for asking questions. It's nice to know that, hopefully, assumably so, that 6 people are real jazz musicians and not pseudo jazz musicians. You know, I always get the feeling that some people are pseudo jazz musicians when they just add rock grooves to, or like straight eighth note grooves to things when they're not based in the clave. You know, you're welcome, Cyril. I hope that helps. Just listen to those 2 people do ballads, Bird and Billie Holiday, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Lester Young a little bit is like that, but those 2 for me have really grasped that. I don't know if they themselves were aware that they were doing it, but to me they really get it. Anybody else who hasn't asked a question, or just give me your questions. I must apologize. I've been just doing a lot more talking than doing, but hey, you know, when you just turn the camera on, that's kind of how it is sometimes, I guess. I always wondered what it would be like if Barry just kind of did one of these and turned on the camera or something, maybe he'd fall asleep in the middle of it. No, but yeah. All right. So another, I'm trying to keep up with when people ask the questions to answer them in a timely way. All right. So before I ask, hi Connor, found your channel recently and really like the precise explanations. Can you recommend exercises to play at slow tempos to develop muscle memory for Barry Harris scales? Sure. So as far as people always kind of couple those two words like Barry Harrison scales together, and I can see why, but a lot of it is he's just saying the importance of knowing like a major scale or a dominant 7 scale or a whole tone scale, but people just so closely associated with him because he's all about the bare bones of things. So really, to answer your question, in my other videos, I talk about the importance of just like Barry does, about being able to play like a major scale or a dominant 7 scale in time, like scale degree 1 going to scale degree 7 and back down, or the opposite. You can make it dominant. But one thing I will say that's important is, just because you mentioned using a metronome, okay, make sure that you do this. Let's say you have the metronome going at 100 BPM, make the clicks be on, when you're playing with it, be on 1 and 3. So many people do it where they put the clicks on 2 and 4 because they want it to represent like a drummer playing the hi-hat on 2 and 4. Don't do that. And the reason is because we need to internalize where beat 1 and 3 is, because it helps us to play in time better. As opposed to when people, they say, all right, here's another one of my pet peeves. From the middle school to high school to collegiate to professional level, people focus on saying, no, it needs to swing harder. It needs to swing hard, hard, hard. And they try to put so much emphasis on beat 2 and 4 that when they try to hone in people's perspective of thinking of those two beats, ultimately the tempo suffers and people just either they slow down or they over tripletize, like 1, 2, 3, 4. We've all heard that collegiate level jazz soloist that always solos like, like that. That's because they're trying so hard to like beat the horse to death by thinking in terms of 2 and 4. But when you think in terms of 1 and 3 and you tap your foot on 1 and 3, you play straighter. So let's say I was playing like a blues at this tempo, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. If this is my foot, I'm tapping on 1 and 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say I'm playing a blues at that tempo. I'm going to tap my foot on 1 and 3. 1, 2, 1, 2. I'm not trying to swing. I'm just trying to play in time. I'm trying to play straight according to beat 1 and 3. So I know that answer was maybe a little more than you're bargaining for, but just practice the scales: major scale, dominant 7th scale, just going up and down straight, and then try doing them in thirds, in triads, and 7th chords. But make sure always when you do it that you establish a tempo, and when you do it, whether it's your foot or whether it's the metronome, that you think in terms of beat 1 and beat 3, and it's going to take you it's really going to help you more. To me, and this is probably the most controversial thing I'm going to say in this whole video, to me, jazz is not about swing. It's just not. Jazz is about playing in time. Okay? Swing is really an illusion. Okay? Now, if you want an example of somebody who plays perfect and seems like they swing really hard, but what they're really doing is playing straight, listen to Charlie Parker. I guarantee you, if any of you are technology savvy and you just take a recording of Charlie Parker and you take away the rhythm section and all that and you listen to him, I guarantee you he's just playing straight. And it's not this over tripletized crap. It's not that. If you want another perfect example of that, there's a tenor player in New York that his whole thing was he got controversial when people just got all offended when on his Facebook he said like F Wayne Shorter, you know, and there's a whole video about it. That was like 5 or 6 years ago that whole crap happened. But if you listen to anything that he plays, he's just perfectly stone-faced like this, just ripping, and he doesn't try to swing at all. It's just perfectly straight and in time, you know. So in terms of time and swing, don't try to swing, do try to play in time. That's why we tap our foot on 1 and 3. And that's why you see so many old videos of older jazz musicians that count a tune off where if this is their foot, they say 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's tapping on 1 and 3, you know. So that's just my advice for that. 1 and 3, that's how you do it. Okay, any similar recommendations for low-speed muscle memory exercises, but mixing in arpeggios with scales? I would say in terms of, to address your question of muscle memory, it helps for me when I do it with both hands. So let's say if I say, all right, I'm going to take the C dominant 7 scale. I do it with both hands. And I say, all right, I'm going to do it in triads. Do it with both hands, because I feel like if you do it with both hands, it stands a better chance of it sticking. You know, to me, don't get so hung up on trying to figure out basic exercises. You just have to start with a scale and realize that there's an infinite number of ways that you can possibly play it. You know, thirds ascending, thirds descending, triads ascending, triads descending. You know, there's just too many different ways to do something, and you're never going to be able to play all of them, ever. No one, Barry says in one of his videos, he says, no one person can play it all. No one person can play everything in any kind of way that anything can possibly be played. You know, because that's the whole thing. We try to learn as much as we can, we play, and then we die. You know, so don't get terribly hung up on that. But my main recommendation would be do it with both hands at the same time. You know, even though it's true, this is the soloing hand for the most part. So if you want more clarification on that, go ahead and ask. All right, what I'm trying to fix is I can play good melodies at 100, but pushing it to 160. Oh, okay. So I think the question that you're really asking here, Bafar, is it's not an issue of technique, even though you might think it is, but it's more being able to hear faster. Now, it is true that there's a limit to being able to play a certain song with good voice leading and good improvisational ideas at slower tempos, but as the tempo gets faster and faster and faster, that gets harder to do. And the way to do that is what I've done with myself and my own playing is that I really have to focus on being able in real time as I'm doing it to be able to harmonically and rhythmically justify every choice I make. Now, before I continue, so many people say things like, learn as much as you can, but when you go to play, forget it all. Or you can't play and think at the same time and all of that. I don't believe in that. Because I think if we think of improvisation as composition sped up and composition as improvisation slowed down, that still doesn't get rid of the fact that the decisions that you're making are informed, you know, by your knowledge of harmony, your knowledge of voice leading, rhythm, time, everything. So it's just going to be a process for you before, and anybody else too, you kind of have to really concentrate on, can I justify every single musical choice that I'm making? And so if something like playing rhythm changes feels good at 100 beats per minute, try moving it up to 110 and seeing if you still have the same amount of mental clarity and can you hear it through your improvisational ideas, you know. So I would just say just start slow and then gradually increase the tempo, but focus the most on, can I justify why, when I tried to play that phrase, why I picked what I picked? Because I can't remember who said this, but someone said something along the lines of, the best jazz musicians are the clearest thinkers or the clearest hearers, And I think the more we practice jazz, it moves from a place of being able to mentally justify the choices we make, and it gradually evolves into just becoming an ear thing. For me, I like to always think about what I'm doing. I mean, don't get me wrong. I play much better when I think about where my line is going and why I justify doing this. I picked this direction because it's from this triad, from this scale, and we're at this point in the tune. I think about all of that in real time. And to me, if I want to improvise something with substance, I have to think about something that has substance. You can't just pull something from nothing, So that's just me. Yeah, like justifying saying words before you speak. You can't just throw it up in the air. If someone tells you they want to hear a story about whales and you talk about chickens, no bueno. So, all right, we just got a bunch of questions in at the same time. Am I available for Skype lessons? I have never delved in Skype before. I don't have an account, or what, if that's even the terminology. I'm like old-fashioned. I did used to have a Facebook, but then I realized that I was wasting my life, which is funny as I'm saying that as I'm staring in front of a camera, but we're talking about stuff with substance as opposed to what flavor of Starbucks we got this morning. So, I don't know if there was enough interest. I guess I could do that. Otherwise, in these types of videos, you guys can ask, which I kind of like this format because it's more like a forum, like intelligent, colloquial salon culture, Let's see here. All right, James, thanks for tuning in, James. He asked, I get confused with Barry Harris videos where he talks about the diminished sixth scales, then all of a sudden he's using the dominant bebop or mixolydian. Okay, so Barry Harris's sixth diminished scale, the major sixth diminished scale, is actually identical to what the term bebop scale actually is. So in other words, if I take C6, like a C6 chord like this, C, E, G, A, right? And I combine it with a D fully diminished chord, D, F, A flat, B, I get that scale. So that's a scale with 8 different notes in it. It's a major scale with a half step in between the 6 and the 5. That is the same thing as what all of you David Baker disciples would call a major bebop scale. It's the same. It's multiple terms for the same thing. It's like when people say minor 7 flat 5 or half diminished. Those two are the same thing. Half diminished and minor 7 flat 5 are interchangeable. I prefer minor 7 flat 5. But, all the white people that go to get their jazz degree in college, they call it a half diminished, So really, James, to answer your question, it's just multiple terms for things that are essentially the same thing. Now, if it were a dominant bebop scale, it wouldn't be major, it would be dominant. But we need that extra note in there to make it symmetrical. that whole thing. So I hope that clears that up. But I also have some videos of mine where I talk about not just the title of mine is what Barry calls it, which is called extra. He doesn't call it bebop scale. He calls it extra note rules, which I think is more of an accurate way to describe what it is. So go ahead and check some of mine out on that. The comments are pouring in like money. Not really. All right, Bafar says, all right, got it. I'll gradually increase the tempo from 100. I've done that before and it does work, but to get impatient, yeah, you just got to take it one step at a time. And it's like, if you really want to do this, you'll take the time to do the steps properly, you know, because everybody's already done that in life, because they didn't just go from infancy to walking. Unless you're a freak of nature, they laid on the ground first, like a slug, and then they crawled, and then they toddled, and then they walked, right? So we're no strangers to that. All right, James asks, are there chord scales for the dominant bebop? Yes, technically there is. It's technically there's a dominant 7th, 6th scale where it alternates between inversions of just a straight up. Where'd the camera go here? I don't know if it. Oh, that's better. Look at that. Where it just alternates inversions of just the straight dominant 7th chord. So here I'm playing C, E, G, B flat, and then it alternates with inversions of the diminished D diminished, D, F, A flat, B, and it just goes up that way. Now, Barry he hardly uses that at all, but technically that is one that exists, you know, so it's technically. I don't think in terms of just a straight scale playing lines you would play it like that, but technically you can play the chords that way. So that is one. But what the more common approach that Barry takes on in terms of chords playing over a dominant chord is what's called the 6th on the 5th. And I do have a video about this. So if we stick with C7, right, the 5th scale degree of C7 is G. That's a perfect 5th or perfect 4th away, whatever direction you think of it. So we're thinking G, and we're going to make it G minor 6. So G minor 6 is G, B flat, D, E. Okay, G, B flat, D, E, and the scale for that would just think of it as like a major scale, but with a flat 3, and you have the half step in between the 5 and 6, so it'd be this. That's a G minor 6 diminished scale. So let's say the chord that we're on is C7. I would play, in terms of chords, G minor 6 diminished over that. So it would sound like. Like that. That's the more common approach that Barry takes. It's called the 6th on the 5th. So I hope that makes sense. Let's see. We got more questions here. Oh, so many questions. Daniel says, hi, Connor. I enjoy your videos. I'm in the Chicago area as well. Are you available for lessons? Yeah, technically I am. Daniel, just try to send me a private message over YouTube, because this is a live video and there are a lot of creeps out there, and you do the rest of the math. So I am available, but just hit me up over YouTube somehow in like a private message, but not on here. Look forward to you contacting me. Thanks for your interest. Katana7XV says your broadcast is straight and great. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think it's, you know, a no-nonsense way of justification in learning jazz, I think, is best. That's one of the reasons why I've gravitated to Barry so much, is because I've never heard him say or play something that either didn't make sense or didn't seem justified to me. I'm serious. Like all the recordings I've heard of him or all the videos I've heard of him talking, it's like the history of jazz, the core history of jazz, and a living institution just telling you about stuff. You know, I just think it's really humbling too. All right, James has a few more questions here. That's all right. That's why I'm here. I know this, but when using the dominant bebop, it's different. Let me see. Just trying to understand the question. Are the rules the same for all bebop scales? Thanks for the 6 on the 5th explanation. You're welcome. Just to kind of make sure that I'm not leaving you in the dark there, James. So for all we can use the so-called bebop scales, but I prefer to call it extra note rules. On any quality, whether it's a major chord, whether it's a minor, like true minor, like minor 6, or whether it's dominant. And I think I'm pretty sure some of my older videos I go over all of that, but it just comes down to basic voice leading as it relates to rhythm and making sure the chord tones are on downbeats as opposed to upbeats. So in that sense, yes, all the rules are the same. But Barry always says that the rules are more important than the scale. In other words, he says that you can have a scale entirely of extra notes, which there's one where it sounds like this. That's a major scale with all extra notes. Dig that. That's kind of a whole different thing. That's a little more complex. But in a sense, yes, all the rules are the same for all the bebop scales. And if you know what, James, there's another YouTube channel of this guitar player that totally gets it, in my opinion. The name of the channel is Things I've Learned from Barry Harris. That guy explains it like even more clearly than I think I do. And he has different things about like how to improvise over the blues, how to improvise over rhythm, the first 8 bars of How High the Moon, how do you do chord melody, how do you think of putting phrases together, all of that. So I would check out that guy too. He's a guitar, not sure what his name is, but check out that channel. That guy, he knows the stuff. All right, Daniel, sounds good. Just try to get in contact with me. Yeah, always welcome. All right, Augmented 6 asks, isn't the 6 on the 5th the same as the harmonized dominant 7th scale? No, it's not. And it's all right. I'm fully fine with backtracking. So I'll go back to C7. So C dominant 7, the 6 on the 5th would be G minor 6, right? That's not exactly the same, but it is close to the harmonized dominant 7th bebop scale. That would be, instead of this, it's this. Can you hear the difference? This is the 6th on the 5th, the G minor 6. And this is the dominant 7th, 6th scale. Similar, but they are different. They're not the same thing. What about using the C6th diminished over the G dominant? C6 diminished over. Oh, okay, I think I know what you're saying. So C6, to me, that seems like it would be more of a pedal point thing. You know what I'm saying? Because to me, C6 is a way to imply F major. And when you put some type of F major over G when it's in a dominant context, that's like suspended. Going to the dominant. Is that kind of what you're asking? Suspended and then going to dominant. That's almost like Chopin, kind of. I don't know. Something like, actually, if you want to hear some real crazy stuff, listen to Donald Lambert play the Pilgrim's Chorus from Tannhauser by Wagner. That is some of the sickest. It's the one that goes. Just pretty stuff like that. He just strides over that like a monster. Like it's ridiculous. I can't even try to imitate that. But anyway, I digress. All right, James, cool. Again, thank you all so much for your questions. I'm more than glad to answer them. I'm glad you guys value my input. Things I learned from Barry Harris is terrific. Yep, to me it's the most sensible and completely 100% logical way to learn how to play jazz. Thank you, James, for the kind words. Appreciate that. It seems to work melodically over a seventh chord. The extra note is just different. Yeah, I can see that. That kind of makes sense. All right, Bafar asks again. I'm sorry if I'm butchering any of these names. I'm doing the best I can. Are you guys talking about the things I learned from Barry Harris' channel? Yeah, I'm talking about that one. It's the guitar player who often wears like the flannels and he has a shaved head, I think. I'm talking about that guy. Yeah, a lot of the stuff that's on this channel, it's a lot of that and more. And I think he's actually personally studied with Barry, whether in a one-on-one basis or going physically to any of his clinics or any of that. I've never been to any of those. I wish I could. I actually think that Barry is in Rome right now, or somewhere in Italy, just doing what he does. I saw a really entertaining video someone posted recently where he was, I can't remember what country, but it was from about 3 years ago. And the best part was this like 10, 11-year-old kid came up, or Barry said, he said, "Where's my little piano player at?" And there's this like 10-year-old kid that comes up and he just plays by himself and he does Around Midnight with the intro and all of that. And he just plays it so simple, but so clearly. And this kid's like 10, better than a majority of people around here in Chicago could play Around Midnight. Seriously, I'll see if you can find that. It was uploaded fairly recently, but at one point the kid, he just did something like that. It was like this 10-year-old kid just playing hip stuff over Around Midnight. It was a gas, cool stuff. So yeah, thanks all of you for tuning in and for asking your questions. Yeah, if there's any of you that want to I don't think I'm comfortable with giving away my email kind of on a live thing just for security reasons and all of that. But I think you can do individual messages through YouTube and all of that. As far as the whole Skype thing or lessons or all of that, I'll see if there's enough interest in that. But I've never dealt with Skype in any capacity before. So yeah, I guess I'll just open it up for if anybody has any more questions about anything Barry Harris related or controversial opinions or anything like that. Just I'll give you the next 30 seconds to a minute to post something or forever hold your peace. So Lucas says Art Tatum is the god I worship. All right. I can do most of his runs, but I never come even close to his reharmonization skills. Any advice? Yeah, Tatum is in certain ways he's approachable, and in certain ways it's really difficult. I would say strictly on the reharmonization part, there are a few kind of standard tricks that he uses. One of them is, I shouldn't call them tricks because that kind of makes it seem like I'm reading it out of some lick book, you know. One thing that he does do is that, let's say it's like a 3-6-2-5 turnaround. So let's say we're in, for the sake of something, F major. Let's say we're in F and we're doing like 3-6-2-5. So like 3-6-2-5. One really common thing is to play the A minor 7, and then from there you play the flat 3 as a dominant. So that would be A flat 7, and then you treat that as a 5 and you go to D flat major, and from D flat major you play C7, and then that takes you back to the 1. That's something that Tatum and many other people after him kind of adopted. I don't think he invented that, but that's kind of a common thing. So if I were doing a song like Mean to Me, and if I did that turnaround, it would sound something like this. Here we go. You kind of hear that? So it was like 1, 2, 3. So that's kind of one thing. That's kind of one little turnaround thing. Another thing that Tatum liked to do is right before it gets to the 2 chord, which would eventually go to the 5 chord, he would do like a 2-5, a half step up, which, as we know, in terms of repertoire, a lot of the standards have things where before it gets to the 2 chord that's diatonic to the key of the song, it'll do like a 2-5, a half step above it. You know, like what's an example of that? Like in Out of Nowhere, where it's, and then it just kind of out of nowhere does the 2-5 a half step above where you'd think it would be to the B flat minor. So what Tatum would do is, let's say we're playing Mean to Me again, but before getting to that G minor 7, going to C7, he would just do that 2-5 a half step up. So maybe something like, so technically what I did there was I kind of implied A flat minor to D flat 7 before I went G minor 7 to C7. So those are kind of 2 Tatum things. Other than that, Tatum to me is someone that's really explored what the whole tone scale is and what it can do. Because how many times have you heard like a solo recording of him where pretty much the introduction is only a whole tone scale? You know, where he does something like Like I think he does an intro to Caravan where it's just only a whole tone scale, like something like. So that kind of, to me, that's another really characteristic sound of him, of his. So I'd say those three things, that kind of 3-6-2-5 turnaround, alternate turnaround thing, the 2-5, a half step up before it gets to the diatonic one, and also really exploring the whole tone scale. Those are the things that I can think off the top of my head. I think we had a few more here. But yeah, Tatum is something, as we all know. James asks, can you talk about the pivotal characteristics of diminished chords? Barry talks about the chords playing together. Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. Yeah, no problem, Lucas. Those are kind of characteristic of what I would consider Tatum-esque sound. Those are three, along with the runs in terms of harmony. That's kind of screams him. So in terms of James, I just want to clarify your question. Do you mean, when you say pivotal, do you mean pivotal in terms of importance, or do you mean pivoting like, and then the pivot being? So I'm just trying to see what you mean. Do you mean pivotal in terms of importance, or like literally doing a pivot? Modulating. Are you in any way referencing like the exercises where that sound like this, like the? Is that what you're talking about? Okay. So let me. Okay, moving between tonalities. So basically, when Barry is doing that, he's trying to show that the way he does it makes sense, but in a way it's kind of misleading. And the reason I say that is because ultimately the most important thing to get from him talking about families is that the dominants are connected. So don't think of it as keys being connected, but that dominant sevenths are connected. So in other words, we know that a fully diminished seventh chord, and I talk about this in one of my videos, or any other person on YouTube or in real life that talks about Barry will talk about this in some capacity, is that a fully diminished seventh chord, whenever you lower any one of those notes a half step, we get a dominant, right? So that means we get 4 dominants from every diminished. So when he talks about family, it's families of 4 dominants because you can lower any one of the 4 notes to get there. So basically, James, what I'm saying is that when he does these exercises going between keys, he's just really at whatever point he wants to, he's just switching the quality of one to a minor seventh in order to get into another key. So the key is not changing each time. Technically, it is, but it's just a matter of him choosing, or anybody choosing when to change the quality of a certain chord in order to lead into a next key. So I guess it's just, let's say he did the whole major scale, right? That was C major scale doing it like that. But when he gets to the starting on F, he makes it minor so that he can imply F minor 7, assumably B flat 7, and then suddenly you're an E flat. So I guess what I'm saying is don't confuse those exercises in terms of changing keys to think that the keys like the diatonic keys themselves are connected. It's you need to think of the dominant sevenths as being connected, and the reason is because but again, I'm not exactly aware of how much of like Barry's stuff you kind of internalized, and that's totally okay because there's a whole lot of it. But the reason why it's so important to realize that the dominant sevenths are family or are they connected is for two main reasons. Number one, let's say I pick two dominant sevenths that I know come from the same fully diminished seventh chord. So in instance, that's C fully diminished 7, and I know that B7 comes from there, and I also know that D7 comes from there. Okay? If I combine B7 and D7 just in terms of chords, it sounds like it makes sense. It sounds good. So I'm going to outline B7 in my left hand, and I'm going to play D7 in my right hand. And when I play them together, it sounds good, right? It's because they're family and they come from the same diminished. Same thing, if I combine B7 and F7, those both come from the same diminished. So B7 and F7, right? It sounds good because they come from the same diminished. They're family, and we also know them as tritones, right? Which is a way of explaining it, but that doesn't entirely explain why you can justify putting them together. Same thing with B7 and what's the other one? A flat 7. Those both come from the same diminished. So here's A flat 7, here's B7. They work together. Now, the other way of showing why it's important to know that they're family is in terms of improvisation, because if I take like a minor 2-5, like G minor 7, flat 5 going to C7, the way I improvise over that is by combining two dominants together that come from the same family. In other words, in order to solo over that 2-5, it's not G minor 7 flat 5 going to C7. It's really E flat 7 going into C7. Why is that? Because E flat 7 and C7 both come from the same fully diminished 7th chord. So that was kind of a lot I threw it at you there, but that's why it's important to understand and know why there are families of 4 dominants, because if you don't know that and you don't understand the relationship, then you're going to have a difficult time kind of navigating through changes. So, and also kind of understanding the chord progressions of the standards, because it all relates to that, at least in Barry's view. So, you're welcome. It helps to understand Barry. I think I take it too literally. Well, actually, taking it literally isn't the worst thing, because the way he describes it is what it literally is. You know, it's kind of no different than if I took like the Omni book and looked at a Charlie Parker solo. You can look at every single note and you're like, wow, you know, listening to it, I know it sounds good, but now I can see and understand why it sounds good, you know. That's the biggest thing that's missing, and I don't even like to call it jazz education, because whenever I say that, it leaves this taste in my mouth of I'm a person that loves going to like the Jazz Education Network and I've got my fancy lanyard on, and that's just like totally not my style, you know. It's about street smarts, you know. It's not about what George Russell and Berkeley and all of these universities talked about what to do. It's I prefer not to learn from that facet of things, but more in terms of like, would you rather learn how to do something from a professor at a college, or someone who would sneak underage at a bar just to sit behind the piano player and steal chords from them? You know, you want to go more straight to the source, and we have the recordings and we have the people that are on those recordings, and you know, Barry is that. you know. So we're approaching an hour and a half here. I didn't think it would go this long, but there's like a lot of interest. All right, before is another question. Connor, I really liked in some of your videos when you play a nice sounding run in real time, then say, okay, here's what I did. Really helpful making the theory tangible. Do more of those if you can. Absolutely. So, you know what? I'll do one right now. So here's a run. If I'm doing C7, that sounded like Tatum, right? What is that? Well, based on something that I talked about earlier in this video, C7, the 6 on the 5th, is G minor 6. So that run, that was G6. So there you go. You know, making the theory tangible is really important, because if people want to add substance to their playing, you have to deal with substance. You know, if these middle school teachers, high school teachers, and especially college teachers, they just don't get it. And they're just all about, playing over the blues, Mixolydian mode, and then it just misses the point completely. So we're just trying to get on track here. So I'll give you guys 30 seconds to a minute to ask any more questions. Otherwise, forever hold your peace. Thanks, Bafar. I really appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in. James asks, how can I get alerts when you do this again? I'm not entirely sure. Actually, no, I take that back. I think if you're subscribed to somebody on YouTube, when they do a live video, it gives a notification on your phone via YouTube, because there are some people that I'm subscribed to that they, when they do that, it's just a matter of you're either there or not there when it goes live. And as far as the times when I pick to do this, it's different every time. You know, people have schedules, things come up, so but I'm pretty sure that if you're subscribed to somebody, YouTube automatically has that notification come up. I'm tech savvy and not at the same time, whatever. But so yeah. Bafar says, yes, you have to click the subscribe button twice, once to sub and another to get live notifications. Okay, so that's the part I was missing. So yeah, that's how you do it. So I guess if there's no other questions, or no more burning questions that you're just dying to ask, I guess I'll leave it there. Again, for anybody that goes back and watches this, I live in the greater Chicago area. I am available for private lessons. I'm just all about trying to help, to give people the information that I think will help them the best. And I try to be as complete in my delivery of information as I possibly can. In other words, I don't believe in shortchanging people. I believe in being honest with the information and how you deliver it, and people can do what they will with it or not. So, yeah, again, thanks to all of you for watching and submitting all of your questions. I know that in some of my previous videos, people have left comments about videos they want to see, and I apologize profusely for not getting to those. Some of them are months old. Some of them are 6 months old. People have different schedules and all that, and sometimes it's just hard to get in front of a camera. So anyway, I'll just leave it at that. Once I end this, the video will have to render, and then it'll be posted up to the channel, or my channel. So thanks, guys. Happy practicing. Happy studying. Learn as much as you can and see what parts of the information you like, what parts that you reject, and whatever comes out, comes out. Oh, Preston just tuned in. Can I still ask a question? Yep, go right ahead. That's why we're here. That's why we're here. You know, this is kind of similar to, you know, what Chopin and Liszt were doing. You know, they would go to a piano and say, hey, dig this, you know. All right, so Preston asks, can you explain how a major 6 chord relates to a major 7? Absolutely. So one of my big pet peeves with jazz teachers especially is that they always try to teach things in terms of so-called extensions, but they never or very rarely help students understand that an extension can be moved justifiably and harmonically. So Preston asked, can I explain why a major 6 is ultimately related to a major 7? So if we think about what a major 7th chord is, and I can assume that anybody watching this already is familiar with that construction. So a major 7th, if I take C major 7, C, E, G, B natural, 1, 3, 5, 7, right? Technically speaking, this chord isn't as stable as it could be. And what I mean by that is that if we think of things in terms of the 6th diminished scale, okay, as I'm assuming most of us know, a 6th diminished scale combines a 6th chord that has 4 notes in it, C, E, G, A, and a fully diminished 7th chord which has 4 notes in it. So in this case, D, F, A flat, B natural, right? So if we think about a C major 7th chord, 3 of those notes, the C, E, and G, are part of the 6th chord. But the B natural isn't part of the 6th chord. It's technically what I, as well as Barry, refer to as a diminished note. So in other words, the most, in terms of, and I hate to say jazz context, but I just will, just to get this point out. Technically, this note wants to either go here to a note of the 6 or here. In other words, diminished notes are saying, move me somewhere, which means if something wants to be moved, that doesn't mean it's stable or mean home. It wants to be moved somewhere. So the reason why a 7th chord or a major 7 relates to a 6th chord is because the 7th, gravity-wise, harmonically-wise, whatever way you want to say, it naturally wants to move to the 6th because 6 is like tonic, grounded, boom, you know? Same thing with chord voicings. Let's say we have like D minor 7 to G7 to C. Preston asks, so do you think the reason it's taught the way it is because of the major scale? Yeah, so with the whole chord scale theory thing, so many people, they just call it this. And they can say that's what the notes are, but what so many people miss out on is they don't understand how to move them. And if jazz is anything, it's moving through chords, right? Whether in an improvisational context or a chording perspective, most people know how to hit chords or they know what chords are, but they may not fully understand how the individual voices can justifiably, harmonically be moved. In other words, the reason why a major 7th is connected to the 6th is because the 7th is the diminished note and it's unstable and it wants to move to the stableness of a note of the 6. So one of the reasons I have such a problem with like jazz, if I guarantee you, you go to any school and take a so-called jazz piano class, you're going to learn things like this, where you do like, and that's exactly how they're going to teach it to you. They'll do like on a minor 7 chord, they'll do the 3, 5, 7, and then the 9, and then go to the dominant, and then go here. But not one of them will ever teach you that this note here, this ninth. So let me give you the key here. So that's how you've learned. Okay, so I'm gonna drop something on you. Okay, let's say here, I'll try to adjust the camera here so you can see. I apologize, I don't have an overhead thing, but left hand D, right hand F, A, C, E. Okay? Now, let's say we're playing D minor 7, okay, in the context of a 2-5. D minor 7, if we just play the root position of it, that's D, F, A, C, correct? That is the exact same chord, but just a different inversion as F major 6. That's F major 6. F, A, C, D. That is the exact same 4 notes as D minor 7. That's D minor 7 in root position. That's F major 6 in root position. Now, if we think of things, so if you're with me so far, if we think of an F major 6 diminished scale where we combine F6 along with G diminished, F6 and G diminished. Sorry, my battery's getting low, but we still got time to do this. We get that major scale with the half step in between 6 and 5. Okay? But the thing I want you to notice is that the E natural is a note of the diminished, not the 6. Meaning, as I just mentioned a few minutes earlier, the notes of the diminished naturally want to move to notes of the 6 in terms of resolution purposes. So in other words, if we go to that keyboard drill, you can learn it like this, but what the teachers never tell you is that this note naturally wants to go here. So instead of doing it like this, they should also be able to harmonically justifiably explain to you why it can sound like this. And then you go to the dominant. It's because D minor 7 is the exact same thing as F major 6, and this note is a diminished note that naturally wants to move here, or technically higher. So that is that's a huge beef in terms of teaching keyboard harmony, piano harmony. Now, I'm fine with playing chords with extensions on them. That's fine. But the thing that separates the people who really know to the ones who maybe don't know as much is understanding how the voices can justifiably harmonically move. Same thing when you play on the major. Hardly any of them tell you that you can do that. Those are diminished notes that are going back to notes of the 6. You see what I'm saying? So that's kind of my main beef with that, is understanding that diminished notes, as I'm referring to them, move. My teacher isn't a jazz teacher, just a normal piano teacher, but jazz is what I love. Yeah, me too, man. It's the continuation of classical music. So just to whet your palate a little bit, when you understand how voices can move like that, that's when you can play things that sound like this. So I'll just play like 2-5-1s the whole time. So check this out. Instead of this, I can do stuff like this. 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 That comes from knowing a scale and knowing how the diminished and sixth notes in the scale can move. Millions of people can hit chords, but the ones who really know how to move them. That's the thing. You hear all the time when people play tunes, they might say, but the ones who really know can do it like this. See that? Or what about the tune, there's an old tune called Can't We Be Friends, where the melody goes. See? Knowing about a scale of chords. Katana, is that what Ahmad Jamal was doing? Sometimes, but mostly not. He was just doing it like this. So not quite. That's more like playing octaves up here and rootless voicings down here. But because Barry and myself too, we're more about playing small chords. We're just harmonizing melodies with the scale. You see? Another example would be, what other tune? This Can't Be Love, like this. You see? So knowing about a scale of chords is one of his huge things, you know. All right, Preston, follow-up question. If you have the time, yeah, absolutely. Where does the major scale come from then? Do you think it's misinterpretation of classical theory? So where do I think the major scale comes from? Well, yeah, that's kind of a tough question, because the way Barry explains it is that the first thing we have is the chromatic scale. You know, and then from there we have the two whole tone scales. And then from there we get the diminished chords. But to me, the real version of the major scale is the one that has the half step in between 6 and 5, because it's symmetrical. But classical theory got it wrong, is that according to Barry, and I don't know if this is true, they knew about that scale, but they did, number one, they didn't know what to call it. Number two, if you listen to classical music, you really don't hear 6 chords, you just hear more triads. And so that's kind of, they just kind of forgot about it. But we need extra notes or bebop scales or whatever to make the voice leading work, you know. So that's kind of the whole deal with that. But the ways like composers like Bach and Mozart and them, they didn't use, sometimes they used chromaticism, but they either used not starting on a downbeat, or they would skip like a third in order to do, like, I just think immediately of Mozart piano concertos, where it has all those runs where there's not chromaticism in them necessarily, but it's things like, you know, so they're not using, it's not chromatic heavy, but it is doing things like either thirds or starting on a different beat to give the illusion of adding something like chromaticism for voice leading, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's kind of what I think about that. So one more, absolutely. I don't know where my battery's at, but I'll try to answer quickly. Is a triad just a 6 chord without the 6? Yeah, you can think of it that way. Absolutely. C6 is C, E, G, A, and if you take away the A, that's just a C triad. So, yep, definitely. Definitely. My phone's telling me my battery's pretty low right now, and we're at about an hour 45 here. So 30 more seconds, unless hold your peace. So glad I caught you before you ended. Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Again, thanks. I think this is the most live and interactive any one of these videos has ever been. Again, I don't have a set time for when I do these. If I have time, I just turn the phone on, and that's how it happens. So I think without further ado, I can finally say thanks. Yeah, sorry, Jamie. This is the longest one that it's ever been, but I hopefully you learned something when it uploads. So thanks everybody for your comments and for taking the time to watch, and keep it real, be old school, play the tradition. That's where it's at. That's where it's always been at. James asks, could you give like a half-hour warning? If I figure out a way how to do that, I will. At the moment, I have no idea how. So before one of these, I'll see what I can do. I promise I will investigate that. So, all right, last time for sure. See you guys later. Happy practicing.